Welcome to Time to Talk Science and Medicine, a new podcast designed to highlight translational researchers from Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario. The main goal of these podcasts will be to focus on the researcher, to find out where they've come from, what motivates them, and how their research will change the world. We also try to find out about the person behind the dangerous idea, which makes their research world-class. My name is Dr. Charlie Highmarch, and I'm a genomics researcher and faculty member of Queen's University.
And my name is Dr. Stephen Archer, and I'm a cardiologist and a researcher. I'm also the director of the Translational Institute of Medicine here at Queen's called TIME. And today we're really pleased to have as our guest Dr. Andrew Winterborn, who's Queen's University veterinarian and director of animal care for the entire university. Andrew has many accolades, and you'll hear about some of the interesting aspects of his life today, but he's been recognized by the Canadian Association of Laboratory Animal Scientists as Veterinarian of the Year in 2017 is just one highlight. So Andrew, thanks so much for coming in today to chat. And before we get too deep into your important work, we'd like to hear about your backstory and what it was that made you want to become a veterinarian.
So thank you very much for inviting me to join your chat this morning. So why did I want to be a veterinarian? I think cliche, love of animals and wanting to be able to have that opportunity to work with animals. But I realized pretty quickly during vet school that I wanted more and was really interested in research as well at the same time. And so being able to work in lab animal medicine, it's given me that opportunity to be able to work very closely with animals while at the same time being an integral component of translational research.
Yeah, it is interesting because your job is different than a typical community vet. You're sort of charged with the well-being of animals, even though they're in research protocols. And that's a very different relationship than a standard veterinarian, I would imagine.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think as a lab animal veterinarian in an institution such as Queen's, I have a dual role. One is making sure that as an institution, we are compliant with all of the regulations associated with the use of animals in research. And so there's both federal, as the Canadian Council on Animal Care, and then Ontario is unique in that there's a provincial act, the Animals for Research Act, which also oversees the use of animals in research. So we have to make sure as an institution that we are compliant with those regulations. And I think for good research, we need to make sure that we're good with those regulations. In addition, there's then the animal welfare clinical component associated with the job as well. And so, you really get great exposure to the incredible research that's ongoing within Canada while maximizing animal welfare.
I think that's it's interesting that you're drawing out that you're working in animal welfare within a university setting, because I think that it's very much a black box to the public that animals are used in scientific research, and we don't promote and we don't advertise that we do it too much. But your role is kind of critical to making sure really that the animals are advocated for as well.
Yeah, so really the cornerstone of any animal care and use program, so the use of animals in science, in translational medicine, for example, is something called the 3 Rs. And the 3 Rs are reduction, replacement, and refinement. So how is there a way to reduce the number of animals that are being used without the loss of the scientific information? How can we refine the experimental processes that we're using? So whether that's handling techniques, the housing of those animals to really maximize the science. And then lastly, replacement. So is there a way to use cell culture to be able to achieve exactly the same amount of information?
So before we get, the 3 Rs is a very interesting concept. And as someone who uses animals in my own research program, I'm very familiar with the rigor that's respected here at Queen's, largely due to your leadership. So, but I want to go back. So when you were a little kid, did you have pets or did you know a veterinarian? I want to tease out a little bit more like why vet as opposed to all the other options.
Yeah, so no, I grew up in England. I was surrounded by dogs. My very first dog was a golden retriever named Apollo. When we immigrated to Canada, Apollo came with us to Canada as well. And then there was a subsequent golden retriever Simba to that as well. So I was always surrounded by dogs. And then I think I was exposed to science as well. My dad was in the pharmaceutical industry, and had an appreciation for the role that animals played in the development of medications. So I think I was sort of approached at it from multiple angles. I had pets. The culture of England is very much animal-centric as well.
Dogs first, people second.
Exactly. Throughout my years of schooling in England, I volunteered at a vet clinic as well. And so there's a lot of exposure.
So you grew up and you thought, I'm going to go straight into vet school.
Yeah, so that was the original thought. There were always some twists and turns along the way. And when I first started university in Canada, I actually started off in comparative literature and history, and then realized, that I really did want to follow my original goals in life, which was to become a veterinarian. And so then ended up transferring to McGill, where I did an undergraduate degree in animal science, so very much an agriculture-based degree. And then from there, went to vet school at the University of Montreal.
It makes me think of Tolstoy. Is it like all dogs are happy in the same way and all cats are miserable in their own unique way? Anyway, in the preparation, it's probably destroying both Tolstoy and that quote. But in any case, in preparation for this chat, we were doing some snooping on you because you didn't tell us anything. So you have too much modesty to be a fellow physician. So, but we found out that you have an interesting project you're involved with that involves the health of unhoused dogs.
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate that I've been able, with colleagues from Providence Care, as well as another veterinarian within the Kingston region, to be able to set up something called community veterinary outreach. And the ultimate goal of community veterinary outreach is to be able to provide One Health clinics to individuals that are either unhoused or marginally housed. And so we provide veterinary services, preventative veterinary services, so vaccination, physical exams, treatment of minor ailments. In addition to that, we then provide human healthcare services as well. So we've been able to partner with Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington Public Health, who bring their porch bus on site. They offer testing for sexually transmitted diseases, smoking cessation, as well as other human health services, including dental education.
It is interesting. You walk down the street. I mean, I've been guilty of this. I think when you see an unhoused person sitting on the street with a dog, you're not, maybe not true for everyone, but your mind goes first to that dog. But you're using the dog as a way to get the human to be healthy in addition to the dog to be healthy. Yeah. And you were telling me, and this is fascinating, the health of the dogs that live on the streets of Kingston. Good, bad, indifferent?
Nope. So it's extremely good. You end up finding out, and it's well published actually, that individuals that are unhoused that have pets, their pets are actually extremely well taken care of. They will put their pets first before themselves when it comes to feeding them. Looking at medical records and historic data around the health of those animals, using body condition score. So how, the amount of fat that those animals have on them, we can use a body condition score. And that body condition score is a very good indicator of overall health of those animals. And it's identical within that population of animals as it is within the general population.
That's so cool. I mean, I think that kind of like, you're obviously showing humanity by going for the animals and treating them and using that as a way of accessing unhoused communities. I think that's such a wonderful thing to do. I think that's really awesome. So on this show, we like to ask researchers and our guests about their dangerous idea. And what we mean by dangerous idea is, if true, it would change the face and reality of the research field that you're in. So can I ask you today, what is your dangerous idea?
Yeah, so I think the dangerous idea as a veterinarian working in lab animal medicine is ultimately to see the replacement of the use of animals in research. Do I think I will see that in my lifetime? At the moment, I do not know, but I think that is something that we should always be striving for, is looking to see how we can progress with research without the use of animals. And in the meantime, it's making sure that if we are using animals, that it's the judicious use of animals and really centering in on the three R's.
Excellent. And actually, I was, in sort of, I work in sort of animal science myself as part of my own research. So I'm familiar from the UK of a fourth R that's actually appearing called responsibility, which I think is a very positive thing to start teaching students as well and sort of bringing that out. Do you think that the three or the four R's are the kind of the way that you're going to be able to drive this dangerous idea forward to constantly refine and replace?
Yep, I certainly do. I really do strongly believe that the three R's, the four R's, as we are starting to see now, is really the cornerstone of the use of animals in research. And when you have a group of dedicated individuals that are reviewing the use of animals in research, that is always being driven is, how can we replace those animals? How can we refine the experimental procedures that are being conducted within the institute?
What are the barriers to succeeding?
So for me, it's knowledge. It really comes down to knowledge at the end of the day. I think there's arguments that are being made that artificial intelligence is going to be able to drive the decrease in the number of animals that are going to be used. But information needs to be fed into AI to start with. And we're still lacking in 2024 the fundamentals behind how our bodies work. And until we fully understand how biological organisms work, it will be very hard to completely transition away from the use of animals.
So one interesting thing about animal research is I think at a university, we tend to think of it as being for the benefit of humans, but that's not always the case, right? I mean, some of what's being done is actually ultimately good for animals. Is that true?
Yep, no, that is certainly true. And if we look at the vast majority of products that are on the veterinary market that are treating our pets at home, they were originally drugs that were developed for the human market and have transitioned into the veterinary market. And so we know that they are safe. In addition to that, if there are products that are developed specifically for the veterinary market, they've also gone through animal testing as well, whether it be a vaccine looking at efficacy. More and more recently as well, we're leveraging our knowledge around monoclonal antibodies and the role that they can play in osteoarthritis and treating pain in osteoarthritis in animals. And this is a direct result of animal-based research.
And it is interesting as putting on my cardiologist hat now. I mean, it is very interesting that whatever one's views on animals and research, there is almost nothing we do in clinical cardiology that is not the direct result of testing in animals. And it's that capricious nature of human physiology and disease that it's, I'm sure ChatGPT and like programs like that will get better and better. But there's always that serendipity, sort of Jurassic Park-like, where we did not anticipate that happening when we gave you this drug. And these procedures and techniques are largely refined in animals, and then they jump to being human procedures, and we investigate them in humans.
Yeah. And the example is actually there's a Canadian example that I use around cardiology, around the development of pacemakers. And the development of pacemakers was very serendipitous, as there was a Canadian engineer that was looking at trying to warm patients following a hypothermic event. And they actually found that with the electrical impulses that they were using, that they could end up pacing the heart. And so that was the very early stages of development of pacemakers. And that's a direct result of animal-based research.
Oh, well, you've explained this to a cardiologist and a PhD scientist. So now we're going to give you a slightly harder job, which is try to explain what you do for a living to a high school student. They're probably actually a more critical audience than we are anyway. But how would you explain the role of a university veterinarian to a high school student?
As cheesy as it sounds, I'd liken my role ultimately, the way I explain it, is that I am the voice of the animals on campus. And so ultimately, they obviously don't have the opportunity to be able to directly communicate with us. And so we can then use their behavior to then interpret how those animals are feeling. And then as a veterinarian and surrounded by a team of experts within the facility, we can be the advocates for those animals, working with the researchers to then maximize the research data that comes out.
So given that your average rodent can't actually speak, can you tell our high school students what kind of ways that you listen to animals without using their voices?
Yeah, so without using their voices, and it's very similar to your dog or your cat at home ultimately as well, is that you can look at their body posture and how are they holding themselves. You can look at, are they grooming? So whether or not their hair coat is standing up or not. You can look at their activity levels. I think all of us know that as soon as we're not feeling very well, we end up being a lot quieter and just want to sit up on the couch and curl up and go to sleep. The same is true for the animals, whether it's the pets that we work with at home or the animals that use in research. It's a very small percentage, though, of animals that we would use in biomedical research that we would see at that extreme, but we're still there to advocate.
Yes, I can tell you I watched the Edmonton Oilers lose the Stanley Cup last night, and my beagle, Arnie, was absolutely appalled. He sat on the couch with his eyes wide open, his tail drooping.
That was you.
That was... Maybe I'm projecting on Arnie, but yes.
Or he was picking up on your sentiments.
Yeah, that's right. There was probably some pheromone of pain. But
So just as a kind of follow-up, who gets to decide the rules and the ethics? I mean, do you kind of make them up, or are there people that is there a committee or...
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, there's sort of these two oversight bodies within Canada which develop guidelines and policies, and then regulations that come out of the Animals for Research Act. And then at the level of the institution, there's a University Animal Care Committee. And the University Animal Care Committee is a diverse group of individuals, and it's actually specified in the policies as well as the Animals for Research Act what the composition of that committee has to be. For me, one of the most important individuals that sits on that committee is our public lay member. So this is an individual that has no vested interest whatsoever in seeing that research move forward. So they're not affiliated with Queen's or with the hospital in any way. And you might say, well, they're only 1 out of or 2 out of 17 individuals, but all decisions at an animal care committee are made by consensus. And so if you have one individual that is dissenting, you have to sit there and discuss how are they going to feel comfortable with this moving forward. And that's really the Animal Care Committee is the institutional body that is there to review those applications to use animals in science.
And I think that's an important point for the public to really understand about animal use. Not only do you have highly responsible scientists who are basically at the bench performing the experiments, but they have to submit their application to this board, and this board has to comply with provincial and national laws.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think that's, that really is the uniqueness of the Canadian review process for the use of animals in research when it comes to this committee. The requirements to have a lay member that sits there that can't be affiliated in any way. And they have to review every single protocol that comes through that uses animals in science.
Okay, so thank you very much for explaining to our high school students what you do. But maybe you could tell us something about your latest discovery and how it will impact or change the face. How will it lead towards your kind of groundbreaking idea, your dangerous idea? What's your latest discovery?
That's a great question. For me, it's around refinement, and it's looking at how can we non-invasively measure heart rate, SpO2 within an animal, and leveraging technologies that are currently available. And so I actually, as a project, have at a research where I'm looking to see whether or not human wearables, such as an Apple Watch, can be translated to being used within animals so that we can remotely monitor physiological parameters.
Yeah, because right now, of course, if you want to, monitor these things, you have to put an indwelling telemeter in, and that's surgery and recovery and time and expense. You're suggesting a wearable technology might replace those.
Yeah, that's some of my thoughts that I'm looking at the moment, is looking to see sort of technology that's commercially available that can be used within the veterinary field to be able to remotely collect data on animals.
It is interesting, having had a bunch of teenagers at one point in my life. I can tell you that if it can survive a teenage boy, it can probably survive a non-human primate. And, and it is interesting, too, because, we talked about this a bit before our formal conversation here. And during the pandemic, a lot of these vaccines that popped out of nowhere. And I think that, I realized, and I'm unapologetic about this, I'm pro-vaccine, and vaccines have saved more lives than virtually anything else we do as physicians or public health officers. But nonetheless, these things were not just given to humans from the lab bench to the needle to the person, right? Yeah. They were tested in animals.
Yeah, every single COVID vaccine that came to market, whether it's, and I think, it's become part of everyone's colloquium now, common colloquium, whether it's Moderna, whether it's AstraZeneca, every single one of those vaccines went through an animal model, and in particular went through a non-human primate model, where they're looking to see whether or not that vaccine would stimulate a large enough immune response to then be able to protect you if you were exposed to COVID. And so, both non-human primates and then actually hamsters were critical in understanding COVID, as well as in the development of vaccines, as well as treatment.
Yes, in fact, we did some work on SARS-CoV-2 targeting mitochondria, and which went through your committee. And we didn't have the Syrian hamsters here. They were with a colleague, Dr. Banerjee, who works at a national facility studying coronaviruses. But here we had the MHV1 virus in mice, and again, testing for understanding COVID pneumonia in animals. Well, you had a lot of successes, that's for sure. And I know that there must have been some challenges along the way. It wasn't all golden labs and Labrador retrievers and sunshine. So what bump in the road have you had in your life as a university veterinarian?
I think probably the biggest challenge that I've faced is when being approached around the use of animals in research. It's really, having been targeted is, not taking a step back. I think ultimately, I strongly believe at this point in time that there are no other options than using animals in research. And so to be sort of questioned on your own morals, I think was a bit of a setback. But I think ultimately I have strong enough beliefs and know that we are doing the best that we can as part of our animal care and use program to maximize animal welfare, that as an institution and personally, we can be proud of our animal care and use program, and then ultimately of the research that comes out of our institution.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about the use of animals in research, even though no one wants the blowback of being mischaracterized as being cruel or non-compassionate. But it's sort of like test pilots for airplanes. Test pilots are essential so airplanes don't crash full of people that are just passengers, and animals are the test pilots of medicine, and you try to use as few as possible and make it as safe as possible. And test pilot also benefits, but it's got to be done, and there's no point in misleading the public that it's not happening.
Yeah, and exactly. And, there's a significant amount of taxpayer funds that go to support the research infrastructure within Canada, in addition to donations that are made to large foundations, whether it's Heart and Stroke Foundation, whether it's Canadian Cancer Society. Their research dollars go to fund basic biomedical research, which are going to go on and find the next treatment strategy for cancer or for stroke or for heart attacks.
And I think, again, something that the public aren't really exposed to very often is that all the rules that are put into place and our understanding of how to construct proper experiments with animals actually improves the science. Stressed animals make for garbage science. Happy, well-enriched, stable animals that are kind of recovered properly, that makes for better science.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that, it leads to reproducibility in science as well. So making sure that whether there is a site in Kingston and a site in Ottawa, if they're both doing the same experiments, that they're coming out with the same results at the end of the day. And that really is driven by that quality in terms of designing the experiment and maximizing animal welfare.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the big projects coming up at Queen's that you and I are partnering in with Charlie is the creation of something called the ARC, the Animal Research Center, which is a new animal facility that will cost millions of dollars, partially funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation as part of TimeCore. Translational Institute of Medicine is building this core resource with my co-applicant on that grant is Dr. Lynn Postovitz, who we previously talked to on this podcast. But it is interesting, you were showing me a graph with the number of mice that are being used in research and now humanized mice that have human immune systems. It's going through the roof.
Yep, exactly. And so, with the growth that we're seeing within our animal care and use program with the use of mice in biomedical research, we're requiring to be able to expand our facilities to be able to conduct this critical research. And this is driven by the excellence in research funding that we're seeing at Queen's with hiring of new research as well. And so we'll then be able to create world-class infrastructure that will be able to house humanized mice, meaning that, you can have a mouse that has a partial human immune system, so that if you are then implanting something called perhaps a patient-derived tumor. So given that we're co-located with Kingston Health Sciences Center, if there's an individual that has been diagnosed with cancer with a mass, that mass can be extracted, it can be isolated, and those cells can then come across the road and be put directly into a mouse, and you can then study that within a humanized mouse. And there are instances then where you can then look at specific treatment strategies against that very specific tumor type from that patient.
That's absolutely fascinating, groundbreaking work that's presumably happening. So thank you for your role in that. Before we move on to our next question, I just want to, again, we kind of trolled through and we looked for some information on you so that we can have some fun stuff to talk about. So moving away from the university and going a bit more international, tell us about goats for widows.
Yeah. So, tying back into the community veterinary outreach, One Health. And so looking at the interaction between animals, humans, and the environment, I was very fortunate to be involved in this One Health project in Indonesia and Borneo. And this was looking at how could we maximize, again, focusing on animal welfare, of maximizing the health of the goats that have been given to widows within the villages. And the goats were provided to the villagers and the widows as an alternative income source, because what we were finding is that people were needing to go into the rainforests and primary rainforests and cutting down the trees there for an income source. And so by providing widows with goats, it was providing an alternative income source so that they no longer had to go into and support illegal logging.
Well, that explains the famous T-shirt, "Buy a goat, save the rainforest." Yeah, I've seen that everywhere.
I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, myself and Dr. Archer, we're very interested in human health, and you've come onto this podcast talking about animal health. But interestingly, your animal health, you're not just helping humans through facilitating well-controlled experiments on animals to be able to look at translational options, but also you've seemed to have internationally and locally linked animal health to human well-being. And of course, we domesticated animals a long time ago. It's no surprise, right, that the animal health and human health are linked.
Yeah, without a doubt. And we know whether it's in Borneo, have been very fortunate to be able to do work with lemurs, in Madagascar as well, in addition to more locally, that, the human animal bond and the human animal trust is very profound, with those animals supporting us as well as us then supporting those animals. And that the health of the environment as well is very closely linked to that as well.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today about all your incredible research and your leadership here at Queen's University, and also the even more exciting dog and goat stories. But before we let you go, we want our audience to know you a little bit better. And so we have some very important high-tech questions that I hope you prepared for in great detail. Actually, we have not showed you these questions.
I'm nervous now.
Some of them I've just made up on the spot.
And there is no right answer. But
It's probably a wrong one, though.
Okay.
It's probably a wrong one. So of all the animals that you've looked after, which is the most difficult animal to actually handle? Like just in sheer terms of like making sure you don't lose an eye or get bitten.
So during my residency in lab animal, I actually worked at a zoo as well. Was very fortunate to be able to work with African elephants. Just given the sheer size of African elephants, they're probably the most intimidating animal to ever have worked with.
I can buy that.
I'll buy that.
No argument there.
No, that's fine. And they all remember you.
They do.
They do.
So I've gone back and visited since, and if I walk up to the fence, they actually have different names from what the public knows them as. And if you call their name, they would come over and greet me.
It's funny. And in our pre-chat, I told you I have a passing interest in camels, which anyone can look up. But camels are the same. They'll remember very long time periods. And if the camel drivers have ever been unkind to them in the past and then sold them, they'll remember them in the street and gore them. It's they're very they have a long fuse. But,
Yeah.
Okay, so here's one of my questions. And I just made this up because I thought it was fun. If you were a breed of dog, which breed of dog would you be based on any available metrics?
I'd probably have to go with golden retriever.
Yeah, I was going to say a lab or a retriever, surely.
Yeah.
Apollo will be happy.
Yeah, he would be happy. Yeah, I think I would have to go with golden retriever.
And if you were a superhero, what would your superhero persona be? Which one do you like?
Probably the ability to fly.
In the Superman mode?
In the Superman mode, yeah.
The arm flapping.
No arm flapping, just in the Superman
Not the
mode.
Wright brothers.
No. No, to be able to, I think there's a lot that we can learn around the world, and being able to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And I love to travel and explore, and I think that would be a phenomenal superpower.
Oh, now that Air Canada's off the list of best airlines, you can probably flying with your own physical persona is probably the way to go.
Easier, right? Yeah. So, what's your favorite meal, and can you cook it?
Yep. So my favorite food probably goes back to my childhood in England, and is having a Sunday roast dinner. And it would have to be with roast beef and Yorkshire puddings and roast potatoes and cauliflower cheese and all that good stuff. And cooking is actually one of my hobbies, and it's one of my favorite things to do when I'm not working. And so, yes, I can cook.
Oh, fantastic. I like a Yorkshire pudding, definitely. That's probably not so well known around these parts.
It's
Nope.
known.
Oh,
We yes. The colonies are not as bad, as remote as you think. We're aware.
So, Dr. Winterborn, on behalf of Dr. Archer and myself, I'd like to thank you very much for taking time to talk to our audience today about your activities at Queen's University, the local community, and internationally. To our listeners, I'd like to thank you for taking time to get to know Dr. Winterborn and Queen's University. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to know more about Queen's University translational medicine researchers, or to share this podcast, you can search for Time to Talk Science and Medicine wherever you normally look for podcasts.